All right, so get this. The invaders of the Migrant Caravan have now demanded that either Trump let them into this country or pay them each $50,000 to turn around. $50,000 each. I mean, this has to be a joke, right? This can't be real. The average teacher in America doesn't even make that much in a year. Now, a conservative estimate would bring the total sum to $125 million to pay them all. I mean, this has gotten so out of hand. These people actually think they are entitled to all the great things that our country has to offer and more, because now they get free money. And yet they don't even have the honor to abide by our laws and come in the right way. So we are lucky the president is willing to shut down the government to put an end to this mess with a border wall, as we learned from that meeting with Trump, Chuck, and Nancy. Because, I don't know, call me crazy, but I think it's worth shutting down a few museums, a few public parks, in order to try and stop the rampant crime inflicted on the nation by these illegal immigrants and the drugs that they bring in. Because last year alone, 200 people died from overdoses each day. Each day, 200 people dead. And of course, most of the deadly heroin, where do you think that's coming from? Where do you think the heroin is coming from? Well, it's coming from the Mexico drug cartels, not to mention the irreparable harm all of this illegal immigration does to our ethos as a nation, to our culture. When we let people come in this way with no requirements, no assimilation, these people don't love our country. For goodness sake, they're marching with Nicaraguan flags. They don't love the country. Learn our Constitution. Learn our way of life before you come here, and you better do it the right way. Right now, our immigration system makes it close to impossible to ensure that border security happens the right way, which is precisely why it is senseless to keep the government open simply for the sake of allowing this pandemonium to continue. Why keep government open when it is not pursuing what the American people mandated in 2016, which includes building a border wall and does not, I repeat, does not include paying the migrants a fortune, $50,000 simply because they attempted to break in.
One thing I think we can agree on is we shouldn't shut down the government over a dispute. And you want to shut it down. You keep talking about it.
The last time, Chuck, you shut it down.
No.
And then you opened it up very quickly. And
20 times.
I don't want to do what you did.
Good.
You know what I'll say? Yes. If we don't get what we want, one way or the other, whether it's through you, through a military, through anything you want to call, I will shut down the government.
Okay,
absolutely.
fair enough.
And I am proud, and I'll tell you what, I am proud to shut down the government for border security, Chuck, because the people of this country don't want criminals and people that have lots of problems and drugs pouring into our country. So I will take the mantle. I will be the one to shut it down. I'm not going to blame you for it. The last time you shut it down, it didn't work. I will take the mantle of shutting down.
So that was the meeting that went down yesterday in the Oval Office. And if you were watching it live on television, you couldn't turn your eyes away from it. And it was for a few reasons. Number one, because the American people are not used to seeing a president saying, I'll shut this whole thing down if we don't fulfill our promises, which is how a lot of us Americans feel. But also, you couldn't turn your eyes away because of how uncomfortable the Democrats were, Chuck and Nancy, with transparency.
We came in here in good faith, and we're entering into this kind of a discussion in the public view.
But it's not bad, Nancy.
No,
it's called transparency.
Now, I'll tell you why the whole transparency thing made them so uncomfortable. It was the notion that they had to conduct their shady business on camera, and you saw they weren't sure whether to treat it like a meeting or a media event. If you guys were honest souls, it'd be the same face for both. But instead, you saw them squirming. They're like, do we talk to the cameras? Do we talk to the president? Do we act like real people, or do we do our fake talking to the media voices? It was a disaster for Chuck and Nancy. Meanwhile, the president, he just seemed like himself, which is why afterwards these two scurried and tried to rewrite history. Can't really rewrite history when the cameras are on in front of everyone who can see with their own eyes what happened. So after the meeting, Pelosi reportedly told her colleagues that for Trump, it was a manhood thing for him. And she reportedly called it a tinkle contest. Classy woman here. It was a tinkle contest, and she was trying to be the mom. Did you see her? The mom? I mean, she's sitting there grasping for basic words, can't remember the words coming out of her mouth. So maybe senile granny, but certainly not mom. But the reason they wanted to debate in private was because they know that a wall is extraordinarily popular with voters, and by arguing against a wall, they know they are governing against the will of the American people. And now that the refugee caravan's demands now that they're getting more and more ridiculous, and it's clear that they are not just poor, tired, hungry refugees yearning for a better life, that they're con artists and grifters, their ransom demand only reinforces why we need a border wall. Now, one migrant shoved an 8-month-old baby through a hole under the existing border wall. So I hope the president knows that this wall that he builds actually has to go into the ground. Can't have holes at the bottom. And 2 of these migrant groups, they actually marched to the US consulate and delivered an ultimatum to the Trump administration. Either let them in or pay them $50,000 each to go home. They say this would help them start businesses. Really, you want the American taxpayer to help fund the businesses of people who aren't even citizens here. We have our own businesses here that could use the help. If it were that easy, I'm sure a lot of Americans would love to be handed $50,000 cash to help start their business. But the migrants say that it might seem like a lot of money to you, the American people, but it's not that much compared to what the American people have taken from them. Really. I mean, the gall is just astounding. Your demand, folks, is an insult to the American people who are busting their tails to provide for their families. And you come up here and you try to barge in and demand that you get paid more than many Americans make in a year simply because you decided to leave your country? Pretty sure it doesn't work that way. It makes absolutely no sense. So we need a solution to this because you know it's only going to get more ridiculous. And when they see the Democrats, Chuck and Nancy, hemming and hawing over whether or not we actually need border security, they are just going to become more emboldened. Shutting down the government is a small price to pay when it comes to solving this issue. They only shut down, when they do a government shutdown, they only shut down non-essential services. So, you know, those who work at national parks, those who work at monuments and museums will have to go home. But the president, the presidential appointees and members of Congress, they don't have to stop working. The Postal Service, the TSA, and air traffic control, they all continue to work. And Americans will still be able to get their Social Security and Medicare benefits and even their food stamps. You still get your unemployment benefits, you still get your VA benefits and your farm subsidies, although those might be delayed. And federal employees still get their money. They still get paid, they're just delayed as well. But they will typically get their pay right after they return. That's what usually happens in a shutdown. And I live in DC, where they did shut down the government once because one day it was too windy. Oh, there's too much wind, you don't have to come to work. So if a shutdown happens, I guarantee you, you won't notice. But at stake here is literally the defining feature of our nation, our border and our sovereignty. And if we risk losing that, we risk losing the country. So we've survived a government shutdown before, and I guarantee you we'll survive one again. But what we will not survive is losing our country to the growing scourge of illegal immigration.
Breaking news, Trump is furious after Honduran invaders issue this sick demand to make the caravans stop coming to America. I'm Josh Bernstein, filling in for Gary Franchi in the Next News Network. Gary's still out sick, but hopefully we'll be back very soon. Benjamin Ari for the Conservative Tribune reports, we've all seen the eye-opening images. Hordes of people from migrant caravans have moved from Central America into Mexico, pushing past border checkpoints, clashing with officials. But a shocking update from those same migrants is casting doubt on the liberal narrative. The caravans are now making demands from the United States, and it's almost impossible to see it as anything else other than a mass extortion. According to the San Diego Tribune, caravan members marched on the U.S. consulate in Tijuana and demanded that either they be granted entry across the border or be paid tens of thousands of dollars. Go ahead and roll this clip.
Well, migrants staying south of the border are giving President Trump an ultimatum. Let them into the country or pay for their return home. 10 News reporter Laura Acevedo is at the border where migrants marched for hours to the U.S. consulate office in Tijuana.
The migrants say they are giving the president 72 hours to meet their demands, but they don't know yet what they will do if he doesn't meet their request. Waving Honduran flags and banners with messages to President Donald Trump, dozens of migrants marched from the shelter where they've been staying to the U.S. consulate in Tijuana. Mexican federal police met them in riot gear, but the march was peaceful and officers worked with them, escorting 2 people into the consulate office. The migrants took this envelope to an official inside. This is a copy of the letter addressed to President Trump. In the letter, the migrants are asking the president to allow everyone from the caravan into the country, saying they are a peaceful group made up of mostly men, women, and children. The letter goes on to read that if the U.S. doesn't want more migrants, they should stop interfering economically, politically, and with military presence in Central American countries, asking the president to shut down all U.S. military bases in those countries. If the president doesn't comply,
proporcione los recursos necesarios.
They want $50,000 from the government for each migrant to make travel plans for their return home.
Yes, folks, that's $50,000 per immigrant. To put that into perspective, the average yearly wage in Mexico is about $15,000. In Honduras, it's even less. Where did they come up with this absurd amount of money? Caravan organizers declared that it was essentially reparations for what the United States stole from Central America. It's worth remembering that the Mexican government previously offered working visas and at least basic jobs for these migrants, but the majority of them turned their nose and refused, and chose instead to try to cross illegally into the United States. The hostile, almost ransom-like insistence on being paid over 3 times Mexico's average annual wage seems to be completely opposite of their past claims that their trek was about escaping crime and poverty back home. Well, you know what? It kind of looks more like a get-rich-quick scheme right now. And if the group's demands are not met, well, it isn't really clear what they said that they will do. You know what we ought to do? We ought to immediately cut off Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, any other country that is part of this caravan, and say, you're done. Financially, you are completely ruined. And then what I would do is I would take all the money that's going back to these countries and I would tax the hell out of it, or just confiscate it completely. Take the whole thing, maybe put a program in the Western Union that automatically redirects it back to taxpayers or to the government, just to make sure that they understand that us, America, is in control of our borders, and we will remain in control of our borders.